We are just at the beginning of the most exciting decade, I think, that health information technology can really start to show the return on investment for patients. And we've done a lot of hard work over the last 10 years where, like with lots of this stuff, the ROI isn't clear because you just got to get that foundation laid. But now we have the opportunity to say, there's an ROI here for patients that we need to be able to realize.
Welcome to The Other 80. I'm Claudia Williams. When Micky Tripathi and I sat down for a chat at Health about a week before Election Day, he was just so excited about the future. So when I re-listened to our conversation this week, I had to ask myself, how much of this will remain when a new team comes to town? The real answer, I don't know. But no matter what, the new administration is going to confront two opposing issues in health technology policy. One, how do we put guardrails in place to avoid bad outcomes? And two, how do we align government around the most promising uses of technology? Micky had some great ideas on both fronts, and the recent cyber bill from Congress shows that bipartisan progress in this area is still possible. So we'll see. Please join me in welcoming Micky Tripathi to The Other 80. Hi, Micky.
Right. Hey, Claudia.
It's great to see you here.
Yeah, you too.
Micky was a little late because the First Lady spoke here and about women's health, which was just amazing. And I wish I had a chance to thank her for her incredible service, and you also, because I think people forget that these roles are so demanding and so important. So thank you for your service.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
And,
continued service.
I was joking that that when I got the invite to speak here, had I known that I was going to be going right after the First Lady, I would have said absolutely not.
Exactly. I know.
But it's obviously an honor to be even on the same stage, right behind her. Yeah.
I want to start with what's important to know about you.
What's important to know about me is this is the most fun job in the world. Let me just say that. You may have seen there was a stat article that said, Micky Tripathi has the hardest job in the, the federal government or something. And I was looking at that and I thought, a lot of my colleagues have really hard jobs too. But I can safely say that my job is the most fun job.
Well, we have a shared love for ONC. I was one of the leaders there during a previous generation.
Yeah,
and
you're part of the OG group.
OG,
that stood
not
up.
OG, but not everyone who's a listener is all that steeped in that work. Some are. So this organization had its 20th birthday this year and was born out of the incredible realization that technology and data are essential drivers for health improvement and that there needs to be a place where those things come together at HHS. Then I think it became more of a household word during the Obama administration when they were implementing the EHR incentive program with CMS. And from that came a set of identities around standards development, standards adoption, certification, policy governance around health IT, and really also playing this coordination role across government. Recently, you've also been very much in the news for the new generation of the organization. And I just wanted to have you describe what that looks like. First of all, what were the changes and why were these changes made?
So we are now the Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy and Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT. So I'm a day one Biden administration appointee. And from the beginning, and this is really a testament to the leadership of Secretary Becerra and Deputy Secretary Palm, from the beginning saying, a few things. One is this department has to be more than the sum of our parts. And you got incredibly powerful, innovative agencies, FDA, NIH, CDC, that have tremendous mission accomplishments, and what they do is, leads the world. But we also need to recognize that more and more we're leveraging health information technology because of all the work you just described. And so you've got more and more agencies now that as we think about our mission priorities and the mission of each of the agencies, you can't think of a mission area where technology isn't at the core of accomplishing that particular mission. So we're seeing more and more our agency partners starting to say, I want to do this with data, and we're going to do this with electronic health records, and recognizing that, wait a minute, if we don't have better alignment of that, we're just going to create all sorts of chaos. So Secretary and Deputy Secretary put into place a policy that requires HHS agencies to be more aligned, and for us to ONC to provide direct technical assistance to them. So that got us in a much more forward-leaning posture, and that was also my inclination as well, that ONC really ought to be a services partner to our HHS agencies. So we ought to be working with CDC to say, how can we leverage our authorities to help you use health information technology to better accomplish the public health mission? So all of that was more and more snowballing, right? As people started to appreciate that, yeah, that's a real need. And that's all before AI. Then of course, AI, ChatGPT comes on the scene, real recognition that, whoa, this is going to be something that really is going to be a top priority from the capabilities that it offers in almost every mission area of the department. And we're at the point where every one of our mission agencies is going to be wanting and needing to spend money and dedicate resources to these kind of capabilities. So we better actually use this moment in time to say we need an HHS level coordinator, single point of accountability to help coordinate all of that stuff. So this is really like over 3.5 years, the recognition that, all right, technology is strategic. AI is just the latest example of that. And ONC has a chassis now that we can build on because we've been working so much with the market and our agency partners. All that led to the reorganization, establishing the Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy. So what we've done is we've basically kept the ONC pieces that everyone has come to know and love. Those perform very well. And now we're adding a fourth division, which is the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. And underneath that is the Chief Data Officer, Chief AI Officer, so that those three working together will provide that technology from a strategic perspective, lean forward for the department.
I remember when I interviewed Renee Wegersen and we talked about what are your powers? The way government works is each agency has a unique set of powers. Sometimes that's just budget. Sometimes it's regulatory. Sometimes it has to do with coordinating across government. Sometimes it's policy guidance. In this new structure, do you have new powers? Or will you have a chance to use the existing powers in different ways?
Every agency has the balance of hard power and soft power.
Yeah.
So the hard power is things you have authority to do.
And you look to your statute and you say, there it is.
Right. It's like, there it is. I can write a regulation on that, or I've got $1 billion to spend. And, but often you've also got the soft power of an organization just exercising influence in the things that it does, the things that it says. It's got momentum. ONC, I think, unlike a lot of our HHS partners, we rely more on the soft power than we do on the hard power because we don't have a huge budget. We're still $65 million.
Jeez.
And we do have authorities. Certainly, the authorities vested in the ability to have the certification program, which now covers 97% of hospitals, 80% of physician offices. That's obviously a tremendous force in the healthcare delivery system, and that gives us a good foundation of certified systems and that digital ecosystem that we all want. That's really enabled by that. But we don't have as much authority as we do the influence, I think, that I'd say is very hard-earned, to be able to work with market partners who I think, and our agency partners who I think see us as being, first and foremost, helpful in the sense of how do we connect the dots on what you're trying to accomplish from a mission perspective, what health IT can do, and then figure out how we orchestrate all of our collective levers, what we can do through certification, through data standards, through FHIR, all of those things through TEFCA, but what you as an agency can do as well. Let's put all that together into a plan that says, here's how we can move the industry forward. And likewise, I think that the industry largely views us as playing that coordinator role with a capital C, to be able to say, look, here's things that the federal government can do. Here's some connecting of the dots to help the industry move forward. And how do we do that in a way that enables the industry to move forward with things that it's too hard for the industry to accomplish on its own, like nationwide data standards. No way the industry can accomplish that. We're seeing with TEFCA, for example, which is voluntary. No one has to participate in TEFCA. Organizations literally stepping forward, investing millions of their own dollars to connect into this network.
In some ways, organizations with huge budgets don't develop the muscle around ecosystem building, and they sort of don't have to.
Right, they don't have to.
I would argue there should be a lot more of that in government in general, because whatever we're contributing is always only a piece of what change needs to happen. And so what I've always loved about ONC is the ability to make a change, observe how it ripples out in the market, adjust it, listen, figure stuff out, which I think is a very unique set of skills and sensibilities that ONC brings and has for a long time. And if you think about the national coordinators, they've been people who have uniquely, personally, had that ability to have a lot of soft power, I think. And it was exciting to watch David Blumenthal, brother of the senator, kind of do that in his own very unique way. Staying for a minute on these changes, if you're wildly successful, how will things look different in 5 years from what they look now? If this new set of roles and responsibilities and powers works well, what will have happened?
So, a couple things. I think that if we just focus on AI for a second, for example, because that's where a lot of our new activity is right now as we stand up the Office of Chief AI Officer. I'm the acting Chief AI Officer right now.
How many titles do you have, Micky?
Yeah, I know. I've got too many, which is, like with lots of transitions, the organization changes happen, and then you have to, sort of fill in all the pieces. So we do have a search that's well underway, and we anticipate filling the permanent roles of Chief AI Officer, Data Officer, and Chief Technology Officer before the end of the calendar year. So we're very excited about that. I'm very excited about that. But I think that as you look at AI, for example, we're working on a strategic plan 5 years from now for us to be able to say, A, we are still on top of the way AI will be able to help the American people from a federal government perspective, working in partnership with the private sector, because we don't know exactly how that's going to unfold, right? So it's hard to say, well, this is what we need to accomplish 5 years from now, because no one in industry can say, well, this is where it's going to be 5 years from now, right? And everyone's surprised in some ways that the areas where it's actually grown really fast, and also the areas where maybe it hasn't taken off in ways that people thought. But I think from a department perspective, if we have the ability to say, you know what, we've got some strategic objectives across all of our areas, and we're moving forward all of those, both with respect to guarding against misuse of these technologies. Equally important to me is misuse. Where are there areas that actually these technologies are going to offer tremendous benefit, and we don't want to inadvertently close those opportunities off just because we didn't really understand what the unintended consequences could be, or that there's existing things in the way regulations work or the way payment systems work that don't encourage these kinds of technologies to be adopted. So I think that's one whole set of things that as a department, if we're still singing together and we have that strategic perspective, and when we have an ecosystem where you're starting to see these technologies being made more and more available, but in a paradigm where people feel like, all right, there are some guardrails that have been established here that we all are recognizing in a public-private, sort of model that has yet to be determined how that works. I think we'll have accomplished something really significant for the next 10, 20 years.
If I'm here on the showroom floor, I'm a healthcare provider, I'm a tech vendor, what types of things might they be able to rely on the federal government to do for this market? And what types of things 100% they should be doing for themselves? How should they think about that?
Yeah, I think a few things. One is there is a need, certainly for us to sort of establish what are the kind of the guardrails here. And I think that's going to be a public-private thing. And so, we certainly want to encourage that innovation, but being able to say, how does the industry coalesce around a set of even like a code of conduct as we move forward, that we can get some early assurance that, all right, these guardrails are in place and we're acting responsibly as we channel that innovation. What I hear is a lot of concern by developers who actually want to develop really innovative products, and they're not trying to act irresponsibly. They want to know what are the guardrails here? Like, what can I develop in a way that actually is going to be beneficial, but that isn't going to be tripping over wires that I'm just not even aware of. So I think that that's a key part of it. I think that as you see what the development is right now, people are, despite the fact that we don't have these central functions in that same way as they do in the UK with the National Health Service, if you look at what's going on at provider organization by provider organization, they're kind of doing the same thing, right? They're focused on the administrative stuff. They're focused on, things that improve workflow, inbox management, prior auth, there's work being done there on claims denials, things like that, which I think is natural, right? Which is to say there's a whole bunch of overhead there, and these tools are a great way for us to be able to attack overhead that we know is a plague on the American healthcare system, right? So that's an obvious place to go. It also doesn't have some of the risks, I'll put that in quotes, that might be more obvious if you're going to move into diagnostic categories or therapeutic categories where it is a little bit more difficult. So I think that that's one area. The other is, I think that as a developer, you need to be very cognizant, and I know it's not easy, of the regulatory environment that you're in. You've got devices that are regulated by the FDA. Software is a medical device. You've got CDS. You've got non-device CDS. You've got things that are in electronic health record systems now that come under ONC regulations. And so understanding that landscape and where you fit into that landscape, I think is also really important. I think from the federal government perspective, we have more work to do to clarify that more as we start to think about these technologies that are racing out ahead and are testing the boundaries of the different regulatory paradigms that we have that came into place, some of them decades ago, like the FDA's regulations, as well as like 21st Century Cures Act, which tried to draw a line between, well, there's devices And then there's like EHRs, right? ONC, your EHRs, FDA, your devices. Well, what about all these software-enabled technologies that are coming up through EHRs? There's, all sorts of, some blurring that starts to happen there. So I think there's more work for us to do, sort of in that space to clarify that for the market.
How do you think about what skills you do need and how to get access to that top talent for the things that you need to do when it's true you don't have the ability to pay people what they would get on the private market?
Yeah, there is an initiative which is government-wide in thinking about, how do we creatively work on opportunities like direct hire and all sorts of other things to be able to get that kind of talent. So that's a government-wide effort. It's not unique to HHS, and I think there's sort of more to do there. But I think there's a lot of effort being put behind that. I will say, within the department itself, one of the, sort of the hopes of the reorganization was to say that if you can really have a dedicated set of resources where people understand, all right, I understand what a chief AI officer does. Mm-hmm. And now I see that it's in an organization that's very market forward and market leaning and has a certain degree of authority. I'll put that in, small a, and coordination capabilities across the department. That's a pretty exciting role. And we're just completing that selection process, as I said, and we got a lot of candidates, a lot of really high quality candidates.
And that's the same punchline that we had when I was at the White House, which is we attracted extraordinary folks because what they saw is the opportunity to have an impact at a scale that really eclipses the scale you could get even in the largest company because it's around the purpose. It's not just around the product.
Yep. When we started in this administration, we started working really closely with the CDC. And, they've been fantastic partners. And with the, the data modernization initiative and the resources coming in there and Rochelle Walensky's leadership of, sort of saying we really need to think differently about how the CDC operates and being a action-forward organization, not a research-forward organization. And one of the things that they did, we did a lot of work on thinking about strategic plan and how you can better enable the organization to both be more responsive to these kinds of things, as well as attract talent from the outside, was standing up a separate new organization that's now called the Office of Public Health, Data, Surveillance, and Technology, led by Jen Layden, Dr.
Yes.
Jen Layden. Think about all the effort of creating a whole new, organization within the CDC that reports directly to the director. I think most people would have said, too hard. I mean, just, not no fault of the CDC, but it's just really hard to do that kind of thing through the leadership of, Rochelle Walensky, Mandy Cohen, Dan Jernigan, Jen Layden. We're able to stand that up. And that organization has attracted top talent from industry because they've been able to show that, look, we've got some real innovative stuff going on here in a tech-forward, product-forward organization that has a ton of running room to be able to do the stuff that's going to do. And they've been wildly successful, I think, in their ability to attract top talent.
I laugh because my previous CTO and Chief Product Officer is one of those people now, Dave Cates. So I can attest to that.
He's an example. Yeah. Right.
This is a slightly more maybe nuanced question, but I interviewed Ziad Obermeyer on this podcast, and Ziad is an expert in how to think about equity and AI, both the challenges and risks, but also the opportunities, frankly, to improve equity. And so much of that comes down to what training data are available, especially the availability of clinical data, not just claims data, and outcomes data, because otherwise the utilization data will just kind of replicate the utilization disparities that exist. And it's been making me think a lot about these large stores of clinical data, whether that's a health system, an HIE, the government, and under what circumstances they should think about opening up the data to create better models. And if I were in one of those organizations, how would I start that conversation and what would my asks be in that process? And I know there's a lot of private stuff going on where one health system might pair up with one technology vendor and they co-develop products and stuff like that. Could we actually use the data we have to create better insights that are available to everybody through an LLM? What advice would you give those people about that question?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important and really hard. I mean, I think as we reflect on just the LLMs that are out there, right, the base, the core foundation models, what's amazing, one is how powerful they actually are, which is just astounding, given the second point is that they have no access to clinical data. And so it's amazing how powerful they are with that, but it also gives insight into, wow, what could they do if they actually had access to clinical data, to real clinical data. And they're certainly doing that in different settings, to your point. So but that's not the core of the LLM itself. There is some really interesting work that folks at Stanford are doing about saying, how do you think about a clinically based LLM? I'll put that in quotes, which is to say, if you can aggregate data from the 10 largest academic medical centers, for example, and build a transformer-based model just on that information, and if you actually think about it one layer higher than an LLM, because an LLM is large language model, obviously, but if you think about the transformer technology being really about technology that helps you understand things that are in ordered sequences, which is, and of course, language is an ordered sequence, which is why it's so good at predicting the next thing, right? It can take all that data and say, all right, now we get it. I know how to predict that. But folks like Nigam Shah and other folks at Stanford and other places are saying, well, wait a minute. If you think about a medical record, a longitudinal patient history, that's an ordered sequence. Claudia came to the doctor at this time. Claudia was feeling, had a fever and a sore throat, and then she went to the doctor, and then the doctor did this set of tests, and then they prescribed this, and then Claudia reported that she was okay or she didn't come back, and then, right, that's like an ordered sequence of things, which is multimodal in nature. There's tremendous opportunity there, I think.
I feel like we could stay on these topics all day, but I do want to get to data sharing and TEFCA and information blocking and things like that. If you were doing the 10-year look back on data sharing in the US for healthcare, what would be your 1-minute vignette about where we were, where we've come, where we're going?
A lot of people are very critical of how electronic health records and interoperability. I'm actually not that critical, even though I wasn't working at ONC at the time. I was certainly a part of the advisory groups that were doing that. And the reason I'm not critical is because, or not overly critical, is because we had the experience almost a decade before with the Massachusetts Health Collaborative, where we were implementing electronic health records in Massachusetts in 3 markets with a project that was funded by Blue Cross in Massachusetts. It was a $50 million project. We were implementing electronic health records, standing up health information exchange, and building a data analytics warehouse on top of that. And one of the things that we saw from that experience was that you can't just jump right to interoperability, because you've got to get people to first transform from a paper-based mindset and workflows to a digital and electronic one. And if you try to do everything all at once, the whole thing just falls apart. And we tried to do that in that project. And one of the things we found was,
why is nobody using the data?
Yeah, right. And people are critical that, these systems support billing. Well, one of the things we found with Mass Health Collaborative was the minute that revenue cycle got interrupted was the minute that all the doctors were like, all right, we're out. Thank you very much, right? And people need to get paid. So you need to work on saying, and meaningfully use stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Well, we could now in hindsight say, well, it should have done this and this and this and this and this. One of the things I think that it did do at a high level was say, this stuff needs to be staged and interoperability needs to be staged. In part because you can't do it all from the beginning. And I would argue, if you look back at when we were doing that, if we had tried to hardwire interoperability at that time, we would all be living under the weight of a CompuServe type of interoperability, right?
Do you guys remember that?
Yeah, right.
Who remembers that?
It would have been based on...
You had to
right?
dial in.
It would have been based on the technology that we had then, where I would argue from an options perspective, meaning option theory, keeping your options open and only make decisions when you have to, that back then you want to say, look, let's let the dust settle on this. Technology is going to evolve, business practices are going to evolve, people's sensibilities are going to evolve. Let's make those decisions about interoperability and how it works later. So I think that as I look back, yes, there's a lot of criticism of it, but I think that it actually is unfolding now in a way that it's going to be much more enduring and sustainable, because it really reflects what the underlying business model needs to support. Now, with things like TEFCA, the information blocking rule, and FHIR APIs are where we need to be nudging the market to say, all right, just remember, we do have underserved providers. They need to be provided for. We do have public health. It needs to be a part of it. We do have payer-provider interoperability, which needs to be brought at scale. And those are the things that TEFCA, for example, is specifically targeting to say, let's build on what the private sector has done with networks, but we need to get to the next level. And that next level requires public participation to say, those are policy priority areas as well that we need to be able to fill. And so far, the private sector has responded and saying, yes, we can't get to the next level of interoperability without more direct public-private engagement.
I was thinking of this in terms of the food desert concept. What would you say are the clusters of data-rich healthcare right now in terms of data sharing? And where are the clusters of data poor?
We've got a tremendous amount, actually, of interoperability. If you think about care quality alone, which is the network of networks, private sector network of networks, they do something like 41 million transactions a day, medical record transactions per day across the country. And that's like the SWIFT global banking network does like 40 million a day. But I think though, what you find is that a lot of providers feel like all you've done is dumped a whole bunch of, structured XML documents on my doorstep, and I can't make any sense of them, right? It's too hard for me to parse, too hard for me to get through. So yes, we have interoperability at one level, but now we need to get to actual data that turns into real information and real knowledge that's really actionable. So I think that's one gap that we have to, sort of get over. And I think that's where FHIR plays an incredibly important role to say that, all right, we need to get that next generation technology. That's what TEFCA helped to support. So I think provider to provider for treatment, arguably it's sort of rich. It needs to be made available in more usable ways, but there's a lot of interoperability that's happening. Where it's really not rich is payer provider. Right? You think about prior auth, you think about all of the friction of information that should flow between payers and providers. Provider to health, to public health, right? Another area which really we've got these little tethers of static reports that go back and forth, but not the kind of interoperability that we really ought to be able to have. And public health information going back to the provider organizations, right? And so I think that's another area. That's where a lot of our focus has been on USCDI Plus initiatives to further data standards in those areas, FHIR APIs to modernize the way interoperability works, and network infrastructure that's targeting those areas to say, you need to have shared services like an electronic phone book, like security, like the ability to look up a patient's records and where those are and be able to access those securely, that target those areas to bring them, forward as well in this nationwide interoperability framework.
I'm going to actually focus on information blocking because enforcement started about a year ago, and there have been actions, but also a lot of complaints that maybe didn't yet turn into a fine, or maybe you never will. What are the patterns you're seeing, and what is the message out to industry about what not to do?
Yeah, if you go onto our portal, one of the things that we've done is tried to do as much transparency as we can around this. So we've got a dashboard on the ONC website that shows the complaints that we get. We get roughly one complaint every business day, since April 5th, 2021. Certainly way lower than HIPAA complaints, which are in the tens of thousands every year, but it's a steady stream. One of the things you see in that data is 85% of the complaints are from patients, and roughly 80 to 85% of them are against providers. So for example, for a patient-facing app, that a patient has said, I want to use this app to be able to access my data. We've had reports of, organizations, we've had lots of listening sessions as well, of app vendors saying that a provider organization has said, I need to sign a BAA, which you absolutely do not need to do for a patient-facing app. For a patient wanting to express their right of access to the data, you don't. But you've got that kind of noise that's still in the system that we need to be able to all move forward and say, you know what, we need to think harder about this. If organizations feel like, wow, that's really changing a whole bunch of our internal policies, I would say, look at the 21st Century Cures Act. That was what the Congress said. So if you think this is a big deal, it's like, yeah, the Congress said it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really important point. Any final things you want to share before we do?
No, I'm just, thanks for the opportunity. This is we are just at the beginning of the most exciting decade, I think, that health information technology can really start to show, I think, the return on investment for patients. And we've done a lot of hard work over the last 10 years where, like with lots of this stuff, the ROI isn't clear because you just got to get that foundation laid. But now we have the opportunity to say, there's an ROI here for patients that we need to be able to realize. And, and I think that's why I'm really excited about this job. And that's why I say it's the most fun thing that I can think of doing right now.
Oh. Well, thank you for doing it. And thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Claudia.
Take care. What is the role of government in shaping how technology develops in the private sector? Is it to regulate so bad things don't happen? Or is it to create new business opportunities aligned with policy goals? For the past 2 decades, ONC, now ASTP, has been on a fairly consistent and middle-of-the-road track combining these two approaches. They helped dispense billions for adoption of electronic health records, which created huge opportunities for the private sector. And they issued policies and standards to create predictability and accountability in the market. Now, with the promise and perils of technology more substantial than ever, and with Elon Musk as a key advisor to the new administration, it seems unlikely this middle-of-the-road path will continue. Will we see an abdication of this market-shaping role, or will it shift into uncharted territory? I guess we're about to find out. This podcast was created by me, Claudia Williams. My podcast producer is Avery Moore-Kloss. Check out the show notes for more information on Micky Tripathi and his work at ONC. There is more information on my background, this podcast, and our guests on our website, www.theother80.com. Until next time, I'm Claudia Williams.